need to do this and this. Okay, here we are. Okay. Well, thank you, Josh. As mentioned, my name is Laura Lewis, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Suicide Prevention Program here at The Ohio State University. I'm also a licensed professional clinical counselor, and I've been at the university about 5.5 years now, and I'm also an alumni. So I'm proud to be here with you today on many fronts. Just to start with a few words together here. I've been asked to do a number of different things in this hour. And so here's our game plan. We're going to talk a little bit about the suicide prevention program, help introduce you to us and the work that we do. We're going to talk about this phenomenon of suicide and perhaps share some facts and some statistics and some important information. I've also been asked to share a few tips about mental health and some self-care. And so we're going to dive into that. I've got some resources to share with you, and I already prepared, although I don't know if you have it just yet, a handout that kind of follows the presentation that includes some of those resources and facts and things that we'll talk about. So I hope that that's helpful to you. And I'm also aware that there's a variety of folks in this audience, right? So we have staff, faculty, and students. And so I tried to keep that in mind as we went through some of this, although it's worth noting that the majority of our work here in the program is with our students on campus. So I might have that language interwoven throughout the presentation more than staff and faculty, but we are doing more to support staff and faculty as well. This is a perfect example of that. So whatever you're here for, whatever you're interested in, I hope it meets your need. And we'll do all of this in 60 minutes with some time for Q&A at the end. And one other thing I want to mention, that whenever we do these kinds of presentations on a topic like suicide, which is so complex and so sometimes not easy to talk about, it's not uncommon for people to have different reactions. All different kinds of reactions, because on some level at this point in life, we all have some relationship or proximity to suicide in some fashion. So I just encourage you to take care of yourself and whatever, again, you're here for, I hope that we can get to it and that you'll be able to walk away with some important, helpful information. So do take care of yourself. And the last point is just simply, this is not a training. But we do trainings. We do great trainings here at Ohio State, and I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. So what we are able to cover, I think, will be sufficient, but there's a whole lot more out there that we can work on together and learn about together and some of the other program initiatives that we do. Okay, disclaimers done. Let's just jump in. A little bit about the Ohio State University Suicide Prevention Program. And I will presuppose that some of you don't know about us, but just in case you don't, we are located on the 4th floor of the Pace building, which is that building that's connected to RPAC with the Red Skywalk. The name of our game is prevention, which is to say we are all about education, outreach, and advocacy. We sometimes get pulled into intervention. We sometimes definitely get pulled into postvention because we do know a lot about how to help a campus heal from an attempt or a completion. But really, we work most closely with our partners on campus for the intervention pieces. We are about trying to get on the front end, to give people the skills and the information that they need in order to know how to recognize the signs and symptoms of suicide and how to reach out, and to build some confidence around that, so that if and when those moments come, those skills actually get used. It's worth noting we've been around for a while, since 2006, where we became established through a pretty important grant that gets given out to colleges and universities who really want to start suicide prevention efforts on their campus. And I believe we were one of the first to get that, and so we're really proud of that. But what we're also equally proud of is the partnerships that have developed from that point forward to get us to where we are now with a staff of 14. So it's worth noting that Student Life, the College of Education and Human Ecology, the Graduate School, and Military and Veteran Services have been with us from the very beginning and continue to make our work possible. And our newest off-campus partner, the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. And so these are folks that we work really closely with, but it would make sense that we would, given that our veterans and our graduate and professional students are at high risk for suicide. So that's really important. But also, there's about 200 partners that we work with at Ohio State and beyond. And I can't underscore enough how important that is, because in the world of suicide prevention, our mentality is that helping people to live well and reaching out to people who may be in distress is everybody's job. And so to do that effectively, to send that message and actually do it well, we would need to have a lot of partners, because it shouldn't really just be the 14 of us in this office or those of us like myself that have a license who are asking the question, are you okay? It should be all of us. So our partners help us to do that. And they're the eyes and ears of campus telling us where to go to ignite that energy and that passion. We are the largest suicide prevention program in the nation. And that's great. We also know folks are watching and listening, and we often get consulted. And so we take our work really seriously. We draw from evidence-based practices, and we contribute to evidence-based practices and try to help other campuses, many of whom received the same grant we did, to create comprehensive opportunities and models on their campus as well. And we are really highly involved at a state, national, and even international level with our programming. And again, we try to pull from that which has already been established in the world of best practices, and we try to give back to that at the same time. So here's how we look. I've found this to be one of the most helpful ways to demonstrate the breadth of our work and the amount of people that are a part of that work. I won't spend too much time on it, but you can see our partners across the top, and you can see all of the different entities that we're a part of and the people that we have in place to do this work, some of which we'll talk about here in a minute. So to work together under this umbrella, we often refer to what we call our philosophical underpinnings. So really, they're just core beliefs that we know are true about suicide prevention, and also how we want to do that at Ohio State. And so sometimes I'll tell people, if you need an elevator speech for the work that we do, or just suicide prevention in general on a college campus, this is a really good one. And so I'll just mention a few of these real quickly. It's really hard to say this out loud every time I say it out loud, but it's true. We cannot say that suicide is 100% preventable. We're not there yet. Now, I believe we will get there. I'm not the only one that thinks that, but it's just far too complex. There are too many variables, and it's not that black and white. And so we can't say that. But what we do know we can say is it is absolutely possible to reduce the risk. And we know what goes into reducing the risk. So to that end, we can say that suicide is preventable. And that is a really powerful message to send, because oftentimes that is a myth about suicide prevention. We also know that stigma gets in the way of people getting help. And it is critical for us to reduce stigma around mental health help seeking. That's a lot of what our prevention work is about. Opening the doorways for people to have conversations and the channels for them to get the help they need. Because quite frankly, it doesn't matter how great our programs are, if people can't access them, or they don't believe that they can do it in a non-judgmental fashion, they won't get to the services that may save their life. So we're all about stigma reduction. We also know that if students are going to get to graduation, they have to be well in their seats. And so suicide prevention and mental health are huge, huge important components to student well-being and also their academic success. I already mentioned that we contribute to practices that are rooted in empirical research, and we contribute and we also benefit from learning about those things as well. And then the last two bullet points, quite frankly, if you don't take anything else away from this webinar, these would be the two I would emphasize, because this is what connects you to us. This is what helps you to become advocates and on our team as well. And the first point there of the last two is that it's very easy for us to put suicide into a mental health box. And when we do that, it limits how people understand how they can approach solving the problem that is in that box. So another way of saying that is, if my perception is that the work of suicide at large can only happen with people who are intervention specialists, behavioral specialists, social workers, counselors, et cetera, we're limiting the way that people can approach this problem. Because quite honestly, it is a public health issue. It's a societal problem, which it goes back to that idea that everybody has a role to play. It's everybody's business. So we really believe that we have to get the mindset out of that box that says only people who do these things can help people with these things. And then to that end, our famous tagline, and also related to the title of this presentation, is that suicide prevention is a shared campus responsibility. It doesn't matter what we teach. It doesn't matter what office we work in. We all have the opportunity to reach out. Okay, so that's us. How about if we take that a little bit more forward and look at suicide as an issue in general? And I thought it might be helpful just to put out some things that we do know for sure. And again, this isn't a training, so it's going to be a very simple slide. But I think these points are helpful for our conversation today. And the first one I mentioned earlier, suicide is complex. And that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their brain around and to believe, because there is sometimes, and this is part of stigma, this prevailing mentality that we should just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, that this is a selfish behavior, and on and on and on. And when we make those kinds of statements, we're really reducing something that, again, is a societal phenomenon into something that we put back in that box, a very tiny box. And an approach to match that, we just need so much more variety in thinking in order to tackle this problem. I didn't want to dwell too much on statistics, and maybe you already know this, but it's unfortunate and sad to say that we're losing 48,000 plus people a year, and that's just in the United States. That roughly averages about 132 people a day. And you may already know it's the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34. So our young people and our young adults and our emerging young adults. Fourth for ages 35 to 44, and fifth for ages 45 to 54. And so we know, suicide is not interested in demographics per se. I mean, it cuts across cultures, ethnicities, races, ages. Everyone, to some extent, could be touched by suicidal thoughts and or more. But here on a college campus, obviously, this is a really important statistic for us. And so in our work in the suicide prevention program, we're really tailoring a lot of our programming and our initiatives to this particular age group, and even more so recently, our staff and faculty as well. Another reason not to put up all the statistics, the numbers are always higher than reported. So while statistics give us good context, they remind us that this is an issue, and it talks about the prevalence of that and gives some tangibility to it. You can rest assured that pretty much every statistic you see is probably not 100% accurate. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I will point back to stigma as one of them. We do know it's predominantly a white male phenomenon. The research underscores that year after year after year. But again, don't misunderstand that to mean that it doesn't cut across many demographics and many groups. There are certain groups that are at higher risk, and I put those over here. Males, as you know, are LGBTQIA+ individuals, international students, minority students, our Black students. We have some recent data that's come out in the last 2 years that really emphasizes an increase, and our Black friends struggling with mental health, but specifically suicidal thoughts. Individuals with disabilities, which most people don't think about because not every disability is seen, and that has some complexity to it. Survivors, those who are left behind, and of course I mentioned our veterans. So we need to do targeted different types of programming and suicide prevention efforts for these groups, and our office is heavily rooted in that. So when I mentioned earlier also, well, we can't say suicide is 100% preventable, but we can say that we know how to reduce the risk. These next 3 bullet points are the evidence for that. So risk factors. Risk factors are the things within our world, and I put 3 examples here: health, our environment, or maybe our historical self, that increase the possibility of suicide, but they may not be direct causes. So another way of saying that is there may be things in our world that predispose and or make it more possible for us to be at risk. It doesn't mean that we will attempt, it doesn't mean we will complete, but it does mean that those are some particular challenges that we've identified could heighten the risk for that. But then we also have these protective factors. And the protective factors are the opposite. The protective factors are things that are in people's lives that help to reduce the risk. And one good example of that is typically in the top 5 all the time, which might be of interest to you, is spirituality. Also belonging, feeling like I matter, having access to resources, being a part of a faith community, right? So if you think about risk factors and protective factors as a bit of a seesaw, while they don't completely void each other out, they definitely help with the balance. Risk factors would be things like, I have a prior attempt, I have access to means, I may deal with substance abuse, or I may have another comorbid medical or mental health condition. I might have traumatic brain injury, etc. So we want more protective factors and we want less risk factors, but we know how important those protective factors are. And then the warning signs are really important, because when we see warning signs, especially one or more of them, we know that means somebody needs immediate help. And so I actually put a slide up here to share with you some of those warning signs. And I will say every time I show the slide, I tell people to get their phone out and take a picture because this is a really good reference guide, although it's not all warning signs, but it is a really good reference guide for some of the most common. So if you want to snap a picture, by all means. But when we see these red flags, we know we need to get someone who can do an assessment and provide that care and offer next steps. And then we talked about those myths. And that contributes to how we make suicide simple and some of the perceptions and attitudes that we have about it. And I thought, well, maybe we could tackle a few of those. Again, just like the warning signs, these are not all the myths that are out there, but these are some of the most common. And so maybe I can kind of help demystify that for you. So the first one is asking someone if they feel suicidal will cause them to attempt suicide. We know from suicide research that couldn't be more false. And in fact, when we study people who have attempted but not completed, what we often hear is that they just wanted someone to ask them very directly if they were struggling and use sometimes very specifically the word suicide or killing yourself or ending your life. And yet people wouldn't do it. And if you think about that for a minute, obviously, people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts are already in a depth of pain. And to be in that pain and hope that somebody would be kind enough, clear enough, safe enough to just directly meet you where you're at. And they don't do it. And they don't do it again. They don't do it again. You can see where more despair creeps in, where more hopelessness creeps in. And so I want to really emphasize that we don't see people have new thoughts, ideas, intentions about suicide simply because we bring the question up and ask them if they're struggling. You will not put that idea in their head. It just doesn't work that way. Number two, people who talk about suicide never attempt or complete. Well, clearly the statistics don't bear that out. People do. And because of that, we take absolutely every single gesture, comment, anything seriously, because we know that that does happen. Attempted or completed suicides happen without warning. Really not true. Up to 85-90% of all deaths by suicide had signs. It's just whether or not we saw them. And while we're never responsible for anyone's death by suicide, we can learn more about those signs and symptoms. And so then we are more apt and positioned to be able to see them because they can be hard to see. But you're here today, so you're already helping with that and making yourself more confident. Once a person is intent on suicide, there's no way of stopping them. Well, again, research does not support that. In fact, what that really underscores is that there are moments where we can intervene, that there are moments where we can build in hope when hope has been lost. There are ways to stop and to prevent. Number 5, people who threaten suicide, they're just seeking attention. Well, I would suggest that we think about it this way. If that's someone's strategy for getting help and they're doing it in an attention-seeking format, wouldn't we still say we need to get you some help? If that's the modality, that's still a cry for help, no matter how we want to spin it. And so if someone's threatening, but we're not sure about those motivations, doesn't matter. We will get them to what they need, and there's probably an underlying thing there that needs some support and some help. Number 6, suicide is hereditary. Doesn't work like that. Now we know, I mentioned that can be a risk factor, but it's not like there's a suicide gene that you pass down through your family. But we do know that there are mood disorders, anxiety, depression, et cetera, that can have hereditary and genetic components to them, which are often part of someone's journey if they are experiencing suicidal thoughts. Number 7, most suicides occur in winter months when the weather is poor. Well, we do have seasonal depression, that is a real thing. And sometimes suicidal thoughts can come with that. And I think the way to frame that just in general here is that suicidal thoughts are just a symptom of depression. You can be depressed and not have suicidal thoughts. It's just one way that that disorder plays itself out. So truthfully, yes, are people feeling that in the blues and the winter and the cold and the dreary like today? Absolutely. But when you graph it out over the course of a year, we actually have lots of different peaks and valleys statistically when people are struggling. And the one that people often don't think about the most is actually the summer. And in the Northern Hemisphere, it's definitely higher in the spring and summer. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Number 8, suicide is more common in lower SES areas. I mentioned before, suicide doesn't care about SES. Anyone is potentially susceptible, but it's those risk factors and protective factors that really come into play there. And then number 9, some people are just always going to be suicidal, and that's just not true. And this is again where we're reminded of moments to intervene and of hope. The body can only sustain so much for so long. It has to give us breaks. And it's in those moments and the crisis moments that we try to help people to see that hope, that there are other ways of thinking, other emotions that you can experience, and other ways of behaving. To say that all people are suicidal all the time is not a true statement. Okay, so here's where I'm sort of in a clunky way transitioning into another piece that's been asked of me. So I hope that was helpful just to learn a little bit more. And I recognize some of you have been touched by suicide in particular ways, and I hope that you took care of yourself as you thought and felt your way through that. We'll have some time to talk a little more at the end. But let's pull it a little bit more to you in this moment and talk about some things that might get in the way of our emotional and mental well-being and positive wellness. I think right now, well, let me say that differently. I think always, as human beings, these are the things we want to feel, but especially right now. We want to feel relaxed. We want to be safe. We want to experience connectedness, acceptance, support, love, and really important right now is hope. I think that's a common ground that pulls us together in this Zoom room right now. And again, I think that's true all the time. To the degree that we need those things might differ from person to person. But if we look over the past 2 years, these are things that have risen to the top for people. And so here are a couple of things that might get in the way of that. And you may have experience with this, you may not. You may know somebody who has experience with this. But I thought we could just talk for a minute about anxiety and stress and depression. You know, we use these words interchangeably, anxiety and stress, but they're not actually the same thing. Stressor or stressor is the thing in your environment that is eliciting an emotional reaction out of you. One emotional reaction you can have is anxiety. But I underlined one there because it's not the only way that we can respond to stress. For some of us, it's the button we automatically push. It's just what we know to do. Maybe there's some genetics there that help us out, unfortunately. Or it's been role modeled for us that that's how we're supposed to respond to stressors or to stress. But it is just one option. And I find it helpful to think about it that way. There's some empowerment that can come with realizing that I can actually have some control over how I think, which in fact will affect how I feel as well. So when we're feeling overwhelmed, the goal here is to accept it and manage it, not to ignore it or not to push it away. Because quite frankly, that just makes it a whole lot worse. But also, and we say this as counselors all the time, we're not in the business of telling people to never feel anxiety because there's a place for that. And really, in some cases, that anxiety could keep us alive. So we don't want to get rid of all of the anxiety. We just want to know how to recognize it, call it what it is, and make it work for us. So in that, I guess I would throw out to you a thought. Do you know your boundaries and limits? Can you tell when you've overreached, or maybe you're overfunctioning, or you've pressed that button? And do you know how often you press it? Is that your only reaction? And could there be something to be done there to help manage it a little bit differently? For me, this might be true for you as well, I don't know. But I'm a routine person. I like my structure. I also can be pretty adaptable and flexible too, but I really groove on my structure. And the pandemic threw that all out the window and created a different routine. And now I think myself included, we're sort of in this reintegration phase where we're starting new routines and pulling together what's working for us as it did maybe 2 years ago, or is not, or could be even working better now than it was 2 years ago. And so something that I think is a good tip here is just to sort of think about your routine and even just specifically about your day. How do you start your day? How do you debrief your day? And how do you shed your day? And some of you know what I mean by the shedding your day part. Some of you, when you come home from work, the first thing you do is take off your work clothes and put your jammies on, or your bunny slippers, or your exercise gear to go to the gym or whatever it may be. I think we're learning that there's something really powerful about the physicality, the behavioral movement of literally changing up the scene. And so thinking about how you approach your day is definitely a mental mindset. How do you debrief your day? Well, that might involve other people. And how you shed your day, how you transition and adjust. Having some routines, some maybe traditions and things that work for you can really help to manage that anxiety and stress. And then of course, if we're feeling that secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, we have to address that. We knew going into the pandemic that these were going to be really important things that would require very specific interventions as we moved through and began to recover from the pandemic. And you can think of different professions, of course, that may be suffering from that, may need that intervention more than others. We've got to recognize that and call it what it is. And then I mentioned maybe depression could get in the way of us feeling those 7 things I put on that slide earlier. And I find it helpful to make a distinction here between sadness and depression. Again, we use these words interchangeably, and we say we're depressed when maybe that's not the right word. And then sometimes we don't call it what it is when it is the right word. But here's how I would help us to make a distinction between these two. So sadness is normal. It's a normal part of being a human being, right? It's also temporary. It ebbs and flows. And when we're sad, we're still happier on more days in our life than not. And they're also probably better characterized as moments. It's not my overall state of being. It's not my overall mood. It doesn't have permanency attached to it. And also I can see hope. Doesn't mean that I always see it and I'm always overjoyed by it to the fullest, because sadness can kind of shave some of that off temporarily. But I can maintain hope. There are things in my life that bring me joy, I can look forward to. They work for me. And those would also potentially be some protective factors. But if I'm dealing with depression, as it is true in its clinical sense, it's really affecting my daily functioning. I'm definitely sad more days than not. And the sad moments are more intense and they're longer in duration. And I have additional symptoms beyond just a sad mood. I might be irritable, I might be agitated, I might have changes in eating and sleeping, I might be having angry episodes or outbursts. And there's more that could come with that, including suicidal thoughts. And hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness kick into gear. And so when you think about someone who may be dealing with suicidal thoughts, if that is in fact a symptom of their depression, this is often what we're talking a lot about, right? I feel hopeless about my situation. Nothing's going to change and nothing's bringing me joy. I feel helpless about my situation because I don't have any power to make a change, and I feel stuck. And because of those things, I have a terrible sense of self-worth. I'm bad, I'm ashamed, I'm not a good person because I just can't fix the operation. And you can feel the heaviness of that even as I say it. That's a very, very difficult, despairing place to be. And that's where we lose hope. We can't find it, or it's just simply to our perspective and it anyhow is not present. So it could be a bad day, could be more. And we really want to make sure that we're using the right language and that we're listening to ourselves and to those around us and thinking about some of these things as we try to figure out what that might actually truly be. So some tips for good mental health. As I thought about these 2 slides, I really thought about the things that we know for sure we should be paying attention to, and I definitely included those. And here are some things maybe that we don't think about as much, or maybe not all of us think about as much. So first and foremost, we've got to talk and think holistically. Those 9 dimensions of wellness are real, and emotional health is in there, as is spiritual health. We can't separate the body, mind, and soul. It just doesn't work that way. And I think most of us know that at this point, but really cultivating lifestyles that understand and put that into action is really where the rubber meets the road. And so if I'm really thinking about myself holistically, I am attentive to all of those dimensions of my being. And I also know that if a change happens in one of those dimensions, it's likely going to impact the other ones. So now I got to pay attention to those. And so really taking care of yourself in a holistic fashion means I'm constantly in this place of evaluation and reflection and thinking about how all of the pieces of me are positively or negatively impacting the other pieces of me. We have to take care of our body. We need to breathe. We need to move. We need to have that exercise, that free shot of dopamine to the brain, right? And think about our nutrition and our sleep. Avoiding excessive use with alcohol, tobacco, and substance use. I put these all in here specifically because the pandemic has challenged all of these for us in some way, shape, or form. And in some cases has made it even better. And we've got to make sure we're doing those routine preventative measures and working with our healthcare providers. I know that we all know we saw some decreases in patient visits and dentist appointments and things like that as the pandemic rolled itself out. And so we just need to be taking good care of ourselves in that way as well. And then how do you unwind? Do you do things that you enjoy that you don't actually get paid for? And it's not to say that what we get paid for we don't enjoy. I certainly do a lot of different things in my world and I enjoy all of them and get paid for most of them. But I definitely do things that I don't get paid for and make time for that and find fulfillment. And that's important. Those are also protective factors. Connecting with your community and or faith-based organizations. Also, if that's part of your world, don't neglect that. And I put this on here because this is something we're starting to see as we're reintegrating into new lifestyles and routines through the pandemic. We were really clear on our messaging, in March of 2020, starting right away, that we needed to stay socially connected and how important that was for us as humans to not let go of our togetherness as we struggled to figure out what was on the horizon. And we put a lot of language into that. And in many cases, the world heard that. We also saw a lot of social isolation, a lot of withdrawal. And as we're sort of in the here and now, something that we're learning, and I know I certainly see this with our students here at Ohio State, and even in the clients that I support, we also now need alone time. And it's okay to have both. We need to be socially connected, and in varying degrees for some of us, we need to have space and time that is not just about connection. Now, the caveat there being, as I put there, not social isolation, right? When we're talking about having alone time, we're not talking about withdrawing away and running away from things. We're talking about going to a space to recharge so I can go back to being socially connected. So there's a very big difference there. But I just wanted to make the point that both have a place in our holistic care, but we want to monitor our motivations behind them. A couple more tips. Let's use our voices. Let's be transparent. This is what I can do and this is what I can't do. This is what I need. This is what I don't need. I think there's a place for thank you, but no thank you. And being able to be clear with people about that and being careful we're not in an I'm sorry apologetic culture all the time. It's okay to say that this works for me because I learned it works for me and not feeling as though we have to explain that away. Focusing on what we can control, which is only truthfully our reactions and our actions, and letting go of what we can't, which is pretty much everything about other people, and knowing the difference between the two. Anxiety is often part of bullet point number 2 there because we don't know that difference. And then acceptance versus agreement. This I think also correlates with stress and with anxiety, as well as with depression and moments of sadness. Sometimes I think we don't know that difference. And I guess I would argue that it is 100% possible to not agree with something, not like it, and still be in a place of peace. Still find a sense of contentment for yourself so that you can continue to be you and to navigate around the very thing that you don't like. So I think we get into trouble when we don't like something, but we think we have to in order to survive it and to get through it or to make the changes we need to. So acceptance and agreement are just not the same, but we have to help them to work together. And so we can not like something or a person or a behavior or a news story. And that's okay. But then we have to manage the emotions and the behaviors that go with that. We don't want to forget about being positive. Gratitude, huge treatment piece, personal piece, protective factor piece. We know a lot about gratitude, and you probably know the benefits of that as well. But there is this thing called toxic positivity, where we have to be careful that we don't tell people that being positive all the time through everything is the only way to go. Because we're human, and that's painting a false reality. So it's okay to feel both extremes of a situation. I can be both sad and happy at the same time. Maybe not in that precise moment, but I can vacillate back and forth between a variety of emotions. And we we, I think, do ourselves a disservice if we try to paint a reality for our internal self that's just not where we're at. We're better off acknowledging it and managing it. And that toxic positivity is something that we learned a lot about in the past 2 years. We want to name and own what we're feeling, but we want to remember that feelings are temporary. They are not meant to be permanent conditions. And that applies 100% when we're overwhelmed and when we're stressed, or when we're just not feeling like our best self. Our emotions have a place. They do really good things for us. They bring us important data. We need them. We couldn't take them out of our body if we wanted to, but we have to manage them and remember that they are giving us info so they can get out and new ones can come in and bring us new info. And so when our decision making is rooted in only our emotions, that could be problematic. That could be tricky. And sometimes when we're talking about people who are struggling with suicide, and impulsivity is definitely a risk factor, you can see where it can feel hopeless very quickly and actions can be taken that somebody didn't actually want in the first place. Similar to feelings being temporary, thoughts are as well. They are not directives, they're not commandments, they're simply suggestions. And I think most of us benefit from taking pauses with our thoughts to make sure we understand them and they actually fit us before we do anything with them. And then lastly, it goes without saying, remember that mental health treatment works. It does help. When we get people access to care, things start to change. And so we just know way too much about that for a lot of mental health conditions and especially suicide. Okay, keeping my eye on the time and wanting to leave some space for us to talk back and forth, I'll move to the last section. How can you now help to promote this campus culture of care and take care of yourself too? So I'll bring it back home to the suicide prevention program. If you enjoyed today's talk, I hope you did, and if you learned some things that were beneficial to you and you know you need to go deeper, you want to learn more, in fact, I would argue that everybody would benefit from this, consider signing up for one of our REACH trainings. We train about 2,500 people a semester, which is about 125 to 150 trainings a semester. That is a large part of our work here in the suicide prevention program, because remember, we're all about education, advocacy, and outreach. So REACH is our flagship program, as I call it sometimes. And this is a 90-minute certifiable training experience to learn how to do exactly what you see there. Warning signs, be empathetic, ask questions, communicate hope, and help people get access to care. So I would encourage you, if you've not been REACH trained, to join the REACH trainer family, a REACH gatekeeper family. Similar, but a little different. The pandemic forced us to think about REACH trainings and not being able to do them in person to get creative with how we could still get skills into people's hands. And so last year we created Reach Out, which is a virtual experience through Zoom. It's not the same as REACH, but they complement each other really well. We encourage everybody to go through both. You still learn a lot about suicide risk factors and warning signs and how to break down stigma, but it's just done through a screen. And so again, you can sign up for that as well. We also do mental health screenings, specifically with our grad and professional students and with our veterans and military affiliated or connected students on campus. We have some licensed counselors who are doctoral GAs in our program who manage this. And essentially the quick down and dirty is that we partner with grad programs and professional programs to roll out a survey, which is basically a stress and depression screening to their students. They can take it, it's completely anonymous, we can't know who they are, but we're behind the scenes talking with them, looking at the symptomology and making some recommendations on resources. And we do that again with our veterans as well. If you're an undergraduate student in this room, just putting in a plug for the importance that we play with student leadership on campus. When we think about a comprehensive campus program for suicide prevention, we cannot do that without thinking about students as leaders. And so there are three major ways that you see you can get involved. All of it's on our website. The Buckeye Campaign Against Suicide is a student org that we advise. Pros are a professional cohort of our program, and we train those students to deliver REACH trainings to their fellow undergrads. And then we have an internship program as well, where we take 3 students each fall and spring to help with the work of our program. Okay, we're bringing it home. So Aside from maybe some of those opportunities, what can you do now? Well, challenge those myths. Now, again, we only covered 9 of them, and there are more. But when you hear people, and maybe very unknowingly attached to those myths, use your voice to say, I'm not so sure. Let me point you in the direction of some resources. That might not be actually true. And I would argue that maybe some of us in this room are holding our own myths too. We might need to do a little bit of searching there and some self-challenging. Talk openly about mental health, and be conscious of your language. We want to use the right language. We don't want to perpetuate stigma. We don't want to be people who come across as judgmental. And not that any of us have to know everything about mental health, but if we are going to talk about it, let's know what we're talking about. And also go seek education to further help us to understand and get that knowledge. Please help to encourage equality between physical and mental health. If someone broke their leg on the sidewalk, we wouldn't just tell them, good luck, I hope you get over that. And we wouldn't do the same to somebody who's dealing with depression. And so we really need to look at that, again, that holistic interpretation of how we take care of each other and also how we independently can live better. And so sending the message that mental health is as important as everything else is really key to reducing stigma and also getting people to help. Show compassion for people who are struggling and let the media know when they're stigmatizing. Quite frankly, that we do that here in this office. When we have especially high profile deaths by suicide, maybe celebrities or people that are in our local area, we are watching the news, we are watching, listening to radio broadcasts, finding opportunities to make sure that we can help people to understand the right ways to report, because there are do's and don'ts. There are things that can increase harm. And so if you know, media or otherwise, someone who's using stigmatizing language or inappropriate language, help us to say, we can help you to do that better. And if you don't know how to do it, point them to us. Be careful you're not harboring your own self-stigma. Educate yourself. And shameless plug for our Out of the Darkness campus block that will happen again in April, hopefully in person. It's a great opportunity to come together with students, staff, faculty, and alumni across campus to promote hope and healing, to walk together, and to reduce stigma around mental health. Last but not least, you have this in your handout, but I'm just pointing out that there are some amazing resources at Ohio State, some of which we've put together, some of which have been collaborations with other departments and programs. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, both the local line and the national line, are outstanding resources. So is the Crisis Text Line. You may be familiar with Student Life's Counseling and Consultation Service, and the wonderful things that they do for our students and the multimodal and dimensional approach that they use to do that. On the right-hand side is something that you can access online. You have that in your handout as well. It's a guide, but it's also kind of a poster for how to talk to someone who may be in distress. It's initially developed for our staff and faculty here to use with students, but quite honestly, anybody could use it. And on that website that I provided to you is the full version of that. We also have these cards. This is a great example of our collaboration with one of our many partners on campus. This is also in your handout, but feel free to take pictures. But these are some of the most needed resources for students for mental and emotional well-being. It's in a one-stop shop card for them to easily access and pass on to others. And this would be another one to take a picture of. The 3 on the right have been around for a while. I just mentioned 2 of the 3. On the left, some of these are more relatively new helplines. And quite specifically, NAMI, for example, kind of really pulled together in the throes of the pandemic. And so we have a lot of options for people, for us to take care of each other. So don't let not having resources be a reason not to ask the question, are you okay? Because they're out there. And again, anybody, I would recommend, put them in your back pocket, put them in your purse, put them on your cell phone. You just never know when you may need to reach out. And I believe we are now officially at the end. So I will pause there and turn it over to Josh, who I think has our game plan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Laura. That was fantastic. I had a question. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen within the webinar to ask a question. We did have one come in. Laura, how could you shed your day when working from home?
Oh, what a good question. That's a fun question. I'm thinking about environment changes. I had somebody tell me once, when you walk over the threshold of your front door, that's an opportunity to shed. Now, if you're working within home and maybe not doing that as much, it's a little different, but you could still go outside for a walk and come back in and walk over the threshold of your front door and sort of say, now things, I'm switching gears. For some people, I'll throw my husband out here actually. As a faculty member, he spends a lot of his day doing stuff at home for our students. And then at the end of the day, spending it teaching. He's got a cup of coffee in between every day. And thankfully, he's only a 1 cup a day kind of guy. But that signifies for him a shift in what I was doing and what I was focused on. And he does a lot of other things with clients as well. And then now I'm getting ready to teach, right? And so I think, thinking about things in your house that bring you joy, things that bring you peace, identifying maybe objects that just feel comforting, that could be helpful. Again, a walk around the block or just simply changing up your environment. I don't know about you, but the pandemic definitely put more stuff on my dining room table. I mean, I have an office and I use it, but defining space has become a thing for us in our homes, and knowing where our workspaces and our play spaces and our prayer spaces and our yoga space, all of those things. So I think about looking at the rooms in your house, think about objects, and thinking about other behavioral practices like meditation, doing mindfulness exercises. There's so many great tools out there that just call us to the present moment and give us an opportunity to shift gears.
Everyone, I want to thank you all for joining today. You all have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.